Hello, so I'm just going to re-record the first few slides because we hit record a bit late. So welcome to learning session 3. We'll be continuing our discussion on storytelling. Today's session will begin with a short icebreaker. We'll do a recap of our past conversations where we discuss movement building and how it connects with storytelling. We'll have a short presentation from our colleague in the Health Communications Department, Edward Alexander, who will provide us with a really good framing for transformative narratives. Then we'll have 4 different breakout groups and have a deeper dive into some of the strategies folks are using in their work. And then we'll close out with a few key takeaways and then next steps. So by the end of this session, you will come away with a deeper understanding of narrative storytelling overall and the approaches used to create them. We did do a quick icebreaker. I'll just share that we have a new colleague, a senior program officer. Their name is Caitlin Donnelly. She comes to us with over 10 years of experience, and she will be supporting grantees from the Healthy Aging and some PSC grantees for all 3 cohorts. So a quick recap of our past learning sessions. So the theme for this year is really focusing on movement building. And so we had our annual meeting back in February where we really focused on understanding what movement building is, different frameworks for it. We explored key components, shared values, building leadership and partnerships. And we just discussed opportunities and challenges in movement building within the current philanthropic landscape. We heard from some really great panelists that are in the philanthropic landscape, as well as folks doing movement building work as they explored these different components of movement building. In April, we really moved into what does movement building mean for the funds? And here we really examined how the fund's mission, vision, and values connect with key components of the movement building framework. And we also took a deeper dive into our individual and collective roles in the movement building ecosystem. So not only were we able to look at movement building, our individual roles in movement building, the roles our organizations play, but those conversations were also able to inform the role that the funds play in movement building and how we might be able to better utilize a movement building framework to think about our impact.
So in our third learning session, we really thought about how we use storytelling to think about the impact that it has in movement building and how, I guess we really could say like how storytelling demonstrates the impact of the work that you're doing, and it can affect movement building by creating really interesting narratives and capturing key themes of the work that is being done. And we were able to really reflect on how those evaluation practice can tell the full story of the work that we're trying to do. And that was our real first conversation digging into storytelling and sort of laying the groundwork about how storytelling can be an effective component for change, particularly in the context of evaluation and measuring impact. That was also followed up by a lunch and learn, which talked about DIY marketing and communications, and particularly sort of different tactics you can use to share the stories that you're creating. And then today, we were really focused on the practical side of framework of storytelling. So lay a foundation of what narrative change looks like, and then hear from some of our grantees as well about the ways that they're using storytelling to show the impact of their work and the different strategies and approaches that they're using to do that work. So just to remind us, movement building is about building collective power through mobilizing individuals, organizations, and communities to affect social, political, or cultural change. So we each are working on different policy systems and environmental change work for our long-term goals. And we all have a role that we play in that. And the grassroots organizing, the coalition building, the leadership development, the power building, all of these things are ways that we work to address systemic issues and root causes in order to achieve those systems change work. And so that is what movement building is. We also talked a little bit more about our social change ecosystem. We explored these different roles that are highlighted here, and we all can play individual roles as well as organizational roles in the ecosystem to think about the broader and interconnectivity of the work that we're doing. So before I transition into our next section, I just wanted to kind of reflect on what this really means for us as the funds team and the things that we're thinking about ourselves. So we've really been able to learn a lot from you all about how movement building is a part of your work, what frameworks you're using, how you think about measuring impact and storytelling. And so we're able to take that into our internal teamwork and think about what actions can we take as the funds to contribute to movement building efforts? What is the role in our of us telling the story of the funds? Why are we telling that story? What story are we telling, and how are we telling it? So it's really for us to think more critically about our role, and a lot of you may have noticed in your GRCs this summer, we've really been uplifting a lot of key themes and thinking about how you are telling the story of your work so that it can inform the way that we tell the story of the fund. So all of this is really helpful to contextualize the importance of this work. And so now I will turn it over to Edward. Is he on? Edward,
Yeah,
are you here? Okay.
yeah, I'm here.
To introduce himself as well as start the conversation on movement building and transformative narratives. And you can let me know when to advance the slides, Edward.
Will do. So first, by way of introduction, my name is Edward Alexander, use he, him pronouns. I've been at HRIA for just over 2 years. And like Jamia said up front, I work on our health communications team. I've heard a lot about this project and I'm really excited to get to be here. And in my role as on the health communications team at HRA, I have worked on quite a number of projects and several of them have been more grant making based projects. And so I've been in them and kind of heard a lot about some of the specific challenges and opportunities that come with trying to do communications for a grant making team. And part of the reason why Jamia just asked if I was here is because I'm based in LA, where it is not quite sunny yet. So Jamia was just making sure that I was here. So yeah, I'm just here to kind of like start to hopefully build on some of the things that you all have talked about in the past and add some thinking that we've been thinking about internal to HRA and our health communications team, which has been trying to adopt more language about transformative narratives and narrative change. Just as a framework and a principle for us to see long-lasting and impactful change coming out of our strategic communications. So with that, we're going to talk about like kind of 4 key themes today. First, we're just going to open up with some grounding in communication, the community engagement. And then we're just going to talk a little bit about storytelling and narrative change. And then we'll move to kind of some of the principles of narrative change and hopefully we will kind of get some of that and folks will make some sense of that. And then finally, we'll make the connection between what you all have been talking about so much in this space, which is movement building, connecting that to narrative change. So with that, the first thing that we want to open with is just this grounding. This is something I've taken up saying a lot in all of the opportunities that I have to talk about communications at a really high level. And it's really just to make sure that folks really think about communications and community engagement as being really connected. This is something that doesn't always happen, and I see as someone that works internal and is a health communications professional, I often see the pitfalls of not thinking of these two things as connected. So up front, we just need to say that effective communications has 3 phases, and all of these are important. We don't always do all 3 of them, but we should endeavor to try them. The first is planning, which is where you set up the strategy, you're building a communications plan, you're doing the research. The second is implementation. So that's like when most of us hear communications, most of us think of this second phase, right? The implementation, the doing, the making, the creating a source or a toolkit or a video. And that's just the second phase. And the third phase, and I think this is the one that maybe gets neglected the most, is the evaluation. So if we set goals in our planning phase, and if we set out objectives, the evaluation stage is when we kind of make sure we did them. So the reason why this is on the slide where we're talking about communication and community engagement is because we should be saying communication and community engagement. They're not the same thing, but they're important and they function together. Having really strong and deep community engagement means that you'll have stronger communications and vice versa. And having that really deep community engagement means that the community members, the folks that you're making communications products and communications plans with, are really included in all 3 phases of your communications approach. So when you're planning, are there like actual community members and residents that will be that are the audiences or whose voices and stories we're telling? Are they part of the planning? When you're doing the implementation, are they there to actually edit and draft and create alongside you? When you're doing evaluation, are they there to help decide and make the decision of whether you did or didn't meet your goals and objectives? And so these are the kinds of things that you don't get to have. You miss the opportunity of having a communications plan and communication strategies that are really deeply engaged and reflected of the community when you aren't thinking of your communications and your community engagement as being connected with each other. And so this is something this is the drum I've been beating over the last couple of years of really trying to better integrate these 2 things and not think of them as separate products. The last thing on this slide that I think is really important that sometimes we forget is that especially when someone's voices or faces or words are in our final communications deliverable, make sure that they have a real meaningful sense of ownership over whatever it is that they're contributing to. Sometimes that means you need to make a really clear dissemination plan and make sure that they know what that is. And other times it's just to give folks a heads up to say, hey, you were in this video and this video is going up on our YouTube page and we're going to be showing it at conferences. I've heard of situations where folks said, yeah, I'll be in this video. And then they see the final cut and they're like, okay, that's fine. And then they're out in an event and they see it. And then they're like, whoa, I don't think I signed up for this. I'm really uncomfortable by this. And so that's something that we really need to be thoughtful of. And it's part of just kind of that accountability that comes with really deep community engagement. So with that, Jimmy, you can go to the next slide. So this is where we get to bridge and to continue some of what you all have talked about. Stories are kind of like what we think of as the building blocks of our communications. So we use stories to communicate. Stories are how we use communications to craft and share new narratives. You all have talked about this. How are you collecting your stories and sharing them to demonstrate the impact of your work? The next step, and hopefully what we can do today, is start to build a bridge that shows we're not just communicating impact just because we can, but we're doing it for a really significant and targeted and strategic reason. And part of how we think of that and how we're continuing to think of that at HRA is to think about narratives. So we're using our stories to unsettle dominant narratives, to shift mental models, and to see transformative narratives. And if there are words in that you're kind of like, I've heard some of those, but I don't really know what they mean in this context, that's perfect because we're going to talk about them coming up next. So Jamie, you can switch to the next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about narrative change right now. I want to, before I get into this, acknowledge that I only have like 20 or so minutes. So we're not going to get into all of the details of this. And so I just want to say up front, if you have questions, please drop them in the chat or pause to raise a hand, pause to ask me. But we're going to go through 4 kind of key concepts that we think about that we're increasingly thinking about as we thinking about narrative change. So the first is mental models, second is narratives, and then the latter 2 are just kind of 2 types of narratives. So dominant narratives and transformative narratives. So we'll get to all of those coming up here soon. But Jimmy, you can go to the next slide. So starting with mental models and narratives, when we talk about mental models at HRA, we often kind of use this iceberg graphic that is on the right side of the screen. The reason why we like this iceberg graphic, and pieces of it are grayed out, so you can't quite read them, but the reason that we really think that the iceberg graphic really does a good job of demonstrating what mental models are is because the top of the iceberg, the pieces of this that we all can see and experience in our day-to-day lives, those are the policies, those are the practices, those are the resource flows. But we know that below the water, all of the things that we can't see influence actually what we are seeing. And mental models are like the deepest part, the deepest and biggest part of the iceberg. So mental models are like the deeply held beliefs and assumptions and the taken for granted ways of operating that influence how we think, what we do, and how we talk. Mental models are like exist all around us, and they influence everything. Narratives are kind of a way of communicating and reinforcing a worldview and engaging people and considering their own understanding of the world around them. So these things are connected. The mental models that we all have and that we hold culturally and as communities really shape the narrative that we're willing to say about topics and the ways that we talk about specific things. They shape our worldview. So when we think about narrative change, we're really trying to be thoughtful about shifting both of these things. How are we kind of unpacking mental models and trying to identify mental models and figure out where they come from so that we can shift those? And then how are we thinking about how mental models influence narratives so that we can think about shifting those as well? So Jimmy, if you go to the next slide, we'll talk about dominant narratives. So this is kind of like in lieu of a definition. This is like a long list of things that kind of dominant narratives are. So I'm just going to read a couple of these things. And up front, one thing that isn't on this slide that catches people up sometimes is that dominant narratives aren't necessarily bad, but we know in practice for a lot of the dominant narratives that we have actually just really are harmful. They really are bad. So dominant narratives are just kind of narratives that are held by many people at this moment in time. They're in our heads and our actions without us even really being aware of them. They're embedded in our institutions, they're embedded in our structures, and they're embedded in our norms. They are not naturally occurring. It's really important that we say this because sometimes we all get caught up in the idea that like the things people believe right now in the present and the way things kind of are just because by nature. They are not naturally occurring. They're created, they're advanced, and they're maintained by people to intentionally shape possibilities and outcomes. Dominant narratives they influence the top of the iceberg, right? They influence the practices, the policies, and the resource flows. Dominant narratives are drawn from a subset of the values and beliefs held by those in power. And that's very connected to this idea of them not being naturally occurring, right? A specific set of people are upholding dominant narratives and making sure that culturally dominant narratives stay relevant because it benefits them. And it's important for us to call that out. And then the last thing, and the one that is maybe the most frustrating bit about this, is that they are more powerful than facts. I know we've all been in a situation where you're talking to someone and you're like, this narrative that you believe is not correct, right? And the first thing you want to do is say it is incorrect because of X, Y, and Z. And we all know in many situations that just doesn't work. And the reason why is because of how deeply held all of these things are, right? So if you have mental models that prop up a certain way of thinking and seeing the world and being, then the dominant narratives that flow from that just feel bigger. They feel more powerful than whatever set of facts you can put in front of someone. So why am I saying all of this? Because the next slide is what we want to be thinking about shifting. And so, Jimmy, if you can go to the next slide. We get to deal in transformative narratives. And this is some of the work in the framing that we as a health communications team at Health Resources in Action are really trying to think about now. If we're going to do strategic communications, if we're going to say that our communications efforts are really strategic, what are they strategic in the direction of? What are we trying to do? And the framework for that we're using is transformative narratives. So these are a different set of narratives. They're different from the dominant narratives. They define what can be. There are aspirations for our communities and the people and the institutions in them. They're grounded in our deepest values and our deepest beliefs. Transformative narratives, if they are done well, if they're put in the right places, if they're communicated well, if they're built up and built out of community, they can shift public consciousness. And that changes how we think the world operates and what we view as the problem and its solutions. I think one of the things that we sometimes get caught up in is just looking at the solutions and not just the problems. If we shift our narratives, we can think about different sets of problems, not just different solutions, but different problems themselves. And these transformative narratives point the way forward toward the future we want. So this is all like really a high level and a crash course, a really quick crash course in transformative narratives and narrative change thinking. And this is something that we've been adopting as a health communications team to really be thoughtful about what we're doing and what we're offering, the projects that we work on and the clients that we work with, bringing a more thoughtful communications approach that's really grounded in a strategy. And the other important thing that I want to say about transformative narratives is that these should come up out of the communities that we're embedded in. And that's why we open this with that grounding of the connection between communications and community engagement. We can't just like create us in this room. We can't just decide what a new transformative narrative is, if it's going to work, if it's going to like actually seed change in the future. We have to really be thoughtful about whose beliefs, whose deep values are we speaking to, and what messages are we sharing. And to that point, I'm going to start to like pin things together here, knit things together here, and then transition us out of this conversation and into breakout groups in a second. So Jimmy, if you can go to the next slide. So I know that you all have been talking about movement building, and I've looked at some of the content that you all have gone over in the slides that you have presented on the past, and the thinking that you all are applying and bringing to movement building. And I found that one of the things that I was resonating, and that was resonating with me really deeply in connecting all of these disparate pieces, is just to recognize that movement building fosters collective power, and narrative change strategies, kind of what I've been talking about, challenge dominant ways of thinking. And together, if we're doing both of those in concert with each other, we're inspiring and maintaining change. And I think the language that you all use in movement building definition is political, social, and cultural change, right? But if we're doing the work of connecting our movement building efforts and our narrative change efforts, we're at the same time that we're thinking about how do we shift narratives, how do we shift the ways people think, we're also thinking about how do we build the kind of power and the collective power to make sure that these new narratives that we want to see in the world are really reflective of the communities that we're working in, and that we have the power to pull them together and advance them. And so I'm just kind of like leaving this as like the point that knits us all together, right? So if you all were talking about movement building before and then started thinking about how storytelling is a way of sharing the impact of your work, hopefully in this abbreviated session, we started to think about how we can kind of use our stories and to share our impact in a more strategic way that connects our movement building efforts in our efforts to inspire change and to build collective power. It knits those efforts with our ways of thinking about narrative change, and how narrative change can really inspire new ways of thinking about the world, and not just new solutions, but also will allow us to see new problems for us to address. So with that, I just have one more slide that just has a couple closing thoughts that are really just questions for folks. And I'm just curious if folks have answers to any of these, you can drop them in the chat or raise a hand to offer. I think we have a couple minutes. But the first is this like really big kind of topic. And I know that some of this language might be kind of new, you might be mulling it over, but how do you all share stories that advance transformative narratives, both in the present and how might you in the future? And then the second is, how do you see alignment between movement building principles and narrative change frameworks? So that last slide was just like one way that I was seeing the alignment between these two kind of concepts. So I'm curious if others are seeing other ways of alignment. And then the third is, how can you use transformative narratives to shape a better future? So Jimmy, I'm not sure how much time we have and if we want to get into open conversation about any of these three. Now I'm kind of looking at you, but yeah, I just want to pause there. And also, if there are questions about the content, please feel free to reach out to me directly. And I'll leave my email in the chat also if folks want to reach out.
So we have about I think we have about 10 minutes, so we can probably have a little bit of conversation, but you are also doing a breakout group. So if folks want to dig into they're welcome to join your breakout session as well. So I see Tracy has their hand up. So I'll stop sharing for a second.
I absolutely love this, Edward. Thank you so much for this kind of deep dive and this more realistic, authentic, internal thought process around change. One of the things that I try to bring to storytelling is to use personal. It's okay to get personal. And I wanted to know if you have any thoughts about how to interweave the personal element of storytelling when I guess it might depend on who in the audience, but try to know your audience and also get personal. So can you just add a little bit of thought to that for me, please?
Yeah, it's really important. And I'm not trying to plug my breakout group. That's not why I'm saying what I'm about to say. But I just want to say that this is light on the details in the process, for the sake of kind of getting through and starting to put together these frameworks that I was talking about. But the kind of like deep audience research is really, really important and is like a very big first step to any of our communications planning. And so I'll be able to speak a little bit more to that in the breakout group and just how we think about audiences. But I think one of the big things that I've always thought about stories, and I've heard even before I became like a health communications professional, is that the more specific your story, the more personal your story, the wider the appeal is, because it's easier for someone to see themselves in a really specific story that feels real, right? You may not say that's me, but it's more believable. It's easier for you to like represent that in your own life. And so I feel like that's not a real answer to your question, but the stewardship of those stories is like, it's a challenge. I don't know that there is a perfect way to do this. But I think being really thoughtful about that stewardship and being really open and honest is like, at the very least, a very important first step. And so it matters who's telling the stories, not just what they look like or how good they are at storytelling, but also like how, and I said this earlier, but how much of a sense of ownership they feel with their story, even after it's kind of gone through the process of like being their story to like being a communications output at the end, right? I think a lot happens between those two stages, and making sure that someone feels comfortable with the stories that they're sharing, and that the stories that they're offering up, not just to you, but like to your audience and to the communities that you're speaking with, is really important. And it's difficult. It's a lot of checking in. It's being accountable to the way that they feel something is going. Sometimes it's like you write a story, like you're writing a blog post that's an interview about someone, right? And you've like chopped up their interview in a certain way, and they read it and they say, I did not say that. This does not feel like me. It's being responsive to that. So that's not a real specific answer to your question, but it's just my way of saying it's a challenge, and it's an important one to grapple with. So yeah.
Jamia, your mic's off while you're speaking.
Okay, thank you. Did it let go? Okay. I was saying thank you, Tracy, for that question, and Edward for your answer. I see Liz and Jessica's hands are up, so we probably can just answer those two more questions in this group, and then we'll go into breakout groups. So Liz, or comments, whatever you have for us.
For me?
Yes, Liz.
Sorry, Ellen and I are together in the same room, and so only one of us is hooked to audio.
Oh.
I wanted to echo Edward and say it is really hard. And Helen is going to put a link to one of her scribes. I'm so fortunate in that Helen has this brilliant epidemiological mind, and she also has this hidden artistic talent that we discovered. So we use graphic scribing. You can click on it as a way of making sure we capture all the voices in the room and that they get to see their voice centered in our work. But I am one of the co-leads on our project in Springfield, where Catherine, we're all going to hear from Catherine, is our learning partner. And And I have big voice in that group. And still, even as we work to tell our story in really racially just ways, and we do a lot of work on race together. Like, we have meetings where I've had meltdowns and cried and said, you know, this is so white. It looks like the white people are doing all the work. Just that basic. I could have better language, but sometimes you just need to say it as it is. So this is really timely. We just had one of those meetings last week. And I don't know what the answers are, but I think there is only one answer, is to keep at it. And that even those, or especially those who are, in my case, identified as a leader, to make sure that I move aside and center like young leaders like Helen, and then our community residents' voices. So that means all of us being able to check ourselves and say, does it really need to be said the way I said it, or does it just need to be said the way community lives it? And then with our white allies, constantly rechecking, because it feels good to be the leader. It feels good to be out front. And we all need to like filter that for ourselves and say, is this ego that's causing me to center myself, whether we're white or non-white, community resident or not. So I just wanted to add, that's what I've been thinking about a lot lately.
Thank you, Liz. And thank you for those thoughts, Jessica.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that, and this is probably echoing what Edward and Liz were saying to some extent, that I feel like those personal stories, like it's not just an incidental relationship, right? Like the personal stories have to be the basis of the broader narrative that you're building, because those are the stories that are grounded in the reality of people's lives and expose all of the cracks and the falsities of that dominant narrative, right? So like at LCW in Lawrence, as part of the network organizing work that we do, we have this concept that we use called resonance, where as we're listening to and gathering stories from all of the residents that we're working with through our door knocking and organizing work and all the conversations we're having in the community, what we're like keeping an eye out for is like, what are the common themes and elements, right? What's the common ground that is emerging from this? Because just because everybody is in a community together or might come from a similar ethnic or cultural background doesn't mean that their stories are the same, and doesn't mean that their experiences are the same. And even if they share a common language, right? So looking really paying attention to that is important for finding out what the truly resonant issues and topics are, and building your organizing work around those so that you're trying to affect the issues that have the broadest impact, I think is really important.
Thank you, Jessica. And Edward, did you have any final thoughts to share?
Yeah, I'll be quick because I know now I'm over time. But so first, thank you all for that all of those comments. It was really, really helpful, and even for me. And I think something that you just said, Jessica, there, that idea of like kind of measuring resonance and seeing what messages folks are resonating with is really important to me. And I think that's one of those like perfect bridges between what we think of as communications and what we think of as community engagement. Because the kind of message testing, that's something we think about a lot in building a communication strategy, right? But then the actual work of message testing is something that you all are doing as you're door knocking and actually talking to folks. The other thing that I think is really important, what you just said, is kind of connecting to this narrative shifting frame of thinking about things. But just because folks live in the same place and might be dealing with what looks like similar sets of problems, they may not be describing those problems the same way. And I think that that's part of what's really important about narrative shifting, and that line about you're not just shifting the solutions to the problems, you're shifting the problems themselves, right? Because sometimes a change in narrative is actually a change in the problems people see. And when we think about this in specific topics, I think one really big one that I live in LA, and one that I see often is around the unhoused folks around here. There's a big narrative shift that I think a lot of folks that are on the front lines of kind of trying to do something and support our unhoused neighbors. There's a big narrative shift happening there, right? And the shift isn't just in the solution, but it's in the problem, and what people are willing to see as the problem, right? Because some people are saying the problem is that our streets are dirty and there are people living on them. And for other folks, the shift that's happening that we can see if we're doing a good job with our narrative the problem that they're seeing is that there are folks living outside without homes, without the supports and benefits that we imagine come with that. And so I think what you just said is really helpful, and I just wanted to echo that. But Jamia, now I'll definitely stop talking. So
Thanks, Edward. I cannot
Okay,
see
good.
who's talking right now. Sorry.
Oh, it was me, Jess. I just wanted to add one small little thing, which is just that I also
Real
think, like,
quick.
yeah, sorry. Sometimes like the shift is also, it's almost like a meta narrative that you're creating, right? It's not about the particular storyline. It's about like that we are people who are working together to create this story and to do something about it, right? And it doesn't, it beyond what the individual problem or solution is. Like that's almost like this deeper story that you're creating. But I'll show.
Well, Jessica's also in a breakout group, so you can talk more about it in their breakout group as well. So yes, this has been really great questions. I love the conversation in the chat. We are going to do these breakout groups, but I think we're going to continue to build on this, even though we kind of frame this as like a 3-part series. I think we're going to continue to talk about storytelling more deeply in our next session, which will be, I think, in October. So yeah, please hold on to all these great thoughts, and let's transition into the breakout groups. You have about 40 minutes in these groups. And so we have 4 breakout sessions. Edward will be in the first breakout group, which will focus on, as he mentioned, thinking about strategic communication planning and how narratives align with that. And you can also, of course, he can provide more context to what he's talked about in this space as well in there if you're interested in that. GreenRoots will be sharing some of their work around art and storytelling and thinking about like how you really address community challenges in relation to being creative and building a better world for us through storytelling. Lawrence CommunityWorks will be talking about how they use storytelling to build connections and the way that they then incorporate that into their marketing efforts. And that's the group that Jessica is a part of. And then Springfield Eats will be talking about storytelling through graphic scribing. And a few folks have already mentioned graphic scribing in this work in the chat. So if you're interested in learning more about graphic scribing, please go to that one. We would like you to kind of equitably distribute yourself. So about 10-ish folks in each group, at least 10 folks. So please be collaborative and think about that. Again, we will be recording these sessions and we will be continuing these conversations in the future. I think I have made everyone who is in a group a co-host. So if you haven't been made a co-host, please let me know now because I will be going into the breakout group and I just want to make sure that there's a co-host for everyone. So if you're not and I don't hear from you, then I'm going to assume that there's a person in your group that has been made a co-host. And each group will have a facilitating partner, a member of our team that will start the conversation. So I will launch the breakout groups.
Sorry for
thank
the
you for
interruption.
saying that. No, thank you. I totally forgot. So I'm not sure if I can share the link or not. I think they're gonna share the slides after. And the link it's actually like in the slide deck. So it'll be in the slide deck with all the links and everything.
I guess the only thing that this isn't really, I guess this is just sort of reiterating what was already said in the main group, but I'm really struck by this sort of connection between the mental models and narratives. And, in order to challenge the dominant narrative, what you had shared, Edward, about audience research was what had kind of come to mind for me, right? Because if you're going to craft a narrative that is going to, that is going to resonate, and really like kind of like penetrate through mental models, you have to know what it is what mental models people actually carry and hold in the first place. And I would imagine that that's the hardest part of all of this, because I think there's a lot that we do in public health where, we're crafting a story or a narrative and we think we know what people think. We think we know what the mental model is, but I think often enough too, we're not talking enough to each other. We're sort of talking in silos. And so we don't actually know what our audience's mental model is, which means that our narrative might be great and it might resonate with the people who already agree with what we think, which is great and helpful to a certain extent in building allies. But it's not really anything that's going to be transformative. And so I think that's what's just sort of standing out to me in all of this is like the step of needing to, one, identify your audience, because I think that's another thing too, is that like we can kind of be a little loosey-goosey with audience identification, and then we don't actually have like a defined audience. And then also, doing that research to truly understand what are the current mental models that your audience holds. So and that's just something that's standing out.
I wanted to just comment on Alexis's point. I'm with the Mass Association for the Blind and Visually Impaired, but we are one division of MAB Community Services, which serves 3 distinct disability communities. And we did a process where we talked to your point, Alexis, about really understanding what those mental models are. For example, we have a school for neurodivergent adolescents, and we asked them that question, essentially, even in your own community here at school and among your teachers and staff, describe for us the moments when you feel, either misunderstood, misheard, or misrepresented. And we did this for each of the 3 divisions, including the Mass Association for the Blind and our older adult consumers with visual disabilities. But just some of the messaging that they shared was not necessarily understood by us as an agency at that point fully. And it was such a really powerful process, that sort of that reminder of the internal, really talking to the people you serve. And informing your work. And I think about how often our organizations go through staff transition, particularly in marketing communications, right? And in the disability community, there's a whole onboarding of kind of terminology, and it's different for each particular group, and on top of sort of racial and ethnic identity priorities and needs to get messaging appropriate to those communities. It's just that this presentation is just, it's like it's the perfect little kernel of training that I feel like we need to have available to us. So anyway, I don't know that I really shared anything particularly helpful, but I was just sort of adding to, I guess, the importance of soliciting that input from how people perceive themselves in their own contexts.
No, I think it's really helpful. Thank you both for those comments. I think this is somewhat selfish, I guess, just to be transparent, but I think that this is the kind of stuff that takes a lot of time also. And it's the kind of time that we don't imagine communication staff needing sometimes, and that becomes a challenge. And I think that that's a challenge that I face sometimes internally, and it's not, and I know that that's like an industry thing, right? Where we say, I need a communications deliverable. And then you go find a communications person and say, make this flyer about this thing that you have no idea about, right? And it just doesn't work that way. Because if we're going to be strategic, if we're going to make plans, it takes kind of like what Alexis was saying, it takes the research up front. It does take the kind of like understanding an audience. I sometimes joke about language in like the really, really concrete way of saying that like we all don't talk the same. Even all English speakers in this country don't talk the same. And sometimes I joke about that with colleagues, like really specifically thinking about across race lines, right? And how people might understand language different. I think I joke sometimes about the habitual B. And I'll say, what if I started just like writing things in the habitual B? And that the habitual B is like the technical phrase for the way that sometimes like lower income communities use I or is in a way that people say that isn't grammatically correct, right? But they know what it means. And what would happen if we like use the habitual be on a flyer? And I've joked about that before and be like, no one would let that fly, but a lot of people that we say is our audience and that is our community would understand exactly what that flyer means, right? And so I think that's just like one really specific instance. Like language is different. The way people refer to themselves, the sentences that they make and construct, and like we talk about, translating things into different languages, but then there's the whole layer of like, Google can translate things, but is that appropriate? Does it work? And the answer is no. Yeah, and so there's just a lot of work that in a perfect world we could do to make sure the things that we make resonate with folks. But then there's also the whole other set of work to Alexis's point, which is just like, do we understand why different people think the way that they do? And we really don't often because we're not talking to everyone. It's not possible for us to talk to everyone. And sometimes we aren't even aware of our own mental models and the narratives that we're carrying. And I'm saying we intentionally because that's like myself. I'm assuming everyone here. We all think and believe things and feel things that we don't necessarily know where they come from, and that's a value too. To be able to expose the fact that like, why do you think this thing that you think? Sometimes the answer is I don't really know, but I do, and that's where the kind of like narratives over facts thing comes into line, right? Because a lot of people believe things that they have no reason to believe them for it, but they are in a line with some narrative or some mental model of how the world works. Yeah. So thank you for both of those comments. I'm not sure, do folks have other things? Were there things of that presentation that were kind of loose or nebulous or anything else I can clear up? Okay. That's my long pause. I'm not afraid of like silences in a Zoom room. I know that stresses some people out, but it doesn't me. I'm a slow thinker, so I like to give other people space for that. And to that point, before I like launch into anything, there's actually a question that I'd love to ask you all and hear what your thoughts are, and before I launch into anything specific. But it's how have you used storytelling in strategic ways in the past? I'm curious. I can type that out again, but it's how have you used storytelling in strategic ways? It's a really big question.
I think I could take a stab at this, and I'll do a little background too when we're talking about these mental models. Our program is a sort of housing is health mission-based goal to increase affordable housing, and it's really bound up in housing equity and some of our discriminatory past. So when we come at this, we really have sort of two different competing mental models. I mean, if you were to put everything into like a binary classification, you'd have the group that says we don't have enough affordable housing, we need programs to help us, maintain our housing stability. And you have the other group that says we really don't, we already got ours and we're happy in this community and we don't really want to make it easier for lower cost housing to come in. We've got these two competing ideas, and sort of our clear base is this group that is saying, I don't have housing stability, I need more, let's work on it. And the main overarching narrative we have is, to try and change that the other group, right? And say, oh, maybe we could do a little bit more to bring in affordable housing, and maybe, accessible and affordable housing is actually good for our community and not bad the way I think it is. So, I mean, we really do have these competing underlying models, and it affects our narrative. And our narrative is having to change because in Massachusetts, it's a little bit easier to do some of these like zoning and land use policies on a statewide level than it is on a local level. And we just had some really big gains on the statewide level. So it's a place for us to reassess and sort of like decide how are we going to shift what our message is a little bit. But when we start doing this storytelling, what is been most effective is when you have like different groups in the room and someone's telling their personal story, right? If we're doing a training, somebody wants to sort of comment on what they're going through, and then it gives the opportunity for other people to hear it. And for the group that we're trying to change. And that's where I think storytelling is most effective for us. And it is an area that we really need to look for more opportunities to do it, because it's not necessarily easy to have that that natural, like non-pressured or manufactured coming together to have that sort of experience organically. And like ultimately our end goal is to be doing this policy change very publicly in sort of the local areas and to create those opportunities for storytelling.
Thank you for that. It's really, really helpful. Can I ask you follow-up questions?
Sure.
Okay. As you're thinking about this, it sounds like you're doing this across the state and in different communities. So it sounds like, is the kind of main strategy here to have folks like to host events and let folks like kind of share at events? Or are you thinking about, are you sharing kind of stories in some way electronically or by paper?
So our program is, our organization serves 70 communities, and my program serves those, but this particular grant is really limited to the Lowell area and the immediate surrounding communities. So we've got about 7 or 8 local municipalities, Lowell being the biggest with like 120 or 130,000 people. One of the big parts of the goal was to help get accessory dwelling units by right in our communities at a local level. That's one of the things that just passed on a statewide level. So, we can say, well, this goal, not necessarily because of our local effort, has been met on the statewide level. What can we do to start promoting people to actually do this? There are other zoning policies that we can change to make it easier to have affordable housing come in. So it's having those type of discussions. And the really goal of this grant that we're doing is to form these local coalitions to be able to go and have that presence when these decisions are being made at a municipal level, and that's sort of the storytelling opportunity that we have and sort of what our program goals are moving to. But it's this idea that, when some of these local land use decisions are made, it's often made by people that won't benefit from affordable housing, just based on, the demographics of the community. And, it would appeal to people that may not already be living in the community, or it's harder for people to get to the meetings if they benefit from it. So it's trying to like shift that balance a little bit so there's more voices heard.
Awesome. Thanks for humoring that question. Do other folks have an answer to that question about how you've used storytelling in strategic ways in your own work? This is me being willing to sit in the silence for a little bit if someone's thinking or stewing.
I'm willing to share an example. I also work in housing, community development partnership on Cape Cod, and our department, our advocacy department, I don't have a specific example yet, but we had our annual fundraiser last week and had so through our PSE grant, we run a program that aims to get people who, of course, are not normally making the decisions about affordable housing involved in the decision making. And there is a young couple who live in East Ham, who one member of the couple is part of our 365 action group, and her wife's family built an ADU using our ADU resource center. And so the two of them got up and spoke about how CDPs work both through Project 365 and also through our ADU resource center, allowed them to go on and live fuller lives in our community. And we're able to not just talk about, what specifically they did with CDP, but then to provide these other details of I was able to say yes to the job promotion because I knew I'd be living here next year. I was able to get involved in the community garden because I have free time now that I'm not working 2 jobs to afford my rent. And it was a really, I don't know, lovely, it really fleshed out, the storytelling really fleshed out how having an ADU in your backyard, or how participating in town meeting can lead to all of these wider connections. And it was really nice to hear.
Thanks for that. Thanks for that story. It's really helpful to hear examples. I think one of the other things that you find is that when you set kind of like goals and objectives for whatever your communications plan might be up front, it's pretty magical how sometimes you'll find a story that's perfect. And that is because you're kind of like, there's a little, what's the phrase? Hindsight bias? I don't know. But when you have a plan and you're like, this is what we want to communicate, and then you're out and you're talking to folks, you find it. You find stories that fit that. Any other kind of thoughts about how you've used your storytelling in strategic ways in communications efforts? I'm asking this and kind of like belaboring the point here because that's kind of like what the toolkit that I'll share here in a second is. It's just kind of like working through some of this strategically. And I have a feeling that you all are doing a lot of this, whether you've seen it laid out in a really formulaic way, like I'm about to share. Just seeing the comment in the chat, it's really, really helpful too. All right, anyone else want to share, offer any thoughts, anything? Okay. Oh, go ahead.
I was just curious to ask Ella a follow-up question. Ella, you mentioned somebody coming to your meeting and telling kind of that personal story of the impact of CDP's work. Was that something that you kind of organized, or was that completely organic? And I'm curious if you plan on kind of leveraging that situation in future meetings, and if so, what your plan might be. Oh, I may have stepped away.
Yeah.
Yeah, while we wait for Ella, she may have stepped away. I have just some thoughts around, part of our challenge, I think, for CHAPA and our MEI program. Oh, there you are, Ella.
Can I get a repeat of that question?
Yeah.
Sorry, Whitney. Ella, I was just asking whether you told the story of kind of somebody coming to this meeting and sharing a personal anecdote about the personal impact your work has had. I was wondering if that was like something that happened completely organically, or if that was something that you had kind of arranged and helped prepare that couple to come and speak on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was the absolute perfect timing. My microwave dinged for my tea and I got up to grab my tea. So sorry about that. So that was it both kind of happened. It was part of our annual fundraising. So it was this like very strategic pitch. Let's tell this beautiful story of this young couple in this community who gets all these things. And then we're going to ask people to donate money. Very strategic. But in terms of like the depth of the story they told, that was pretty natural. Part of our work as a community organization is really putting down deep roots with the people that we work with. And so like Katie's family started working with us for the ADU, which was how we met Natalia. And it turns out that Natalia was interested in local government. So I connected with her and got her involved in this thing. And it happened naturally. Like the more one got involved in our organization, the more the other did as well. And we really like built this thing, and they're cool people. And now I hang out with them sometimes on the weekends. Like it really was this like actual community building that happened. So that occurred naturally and didn't require any coaching or any crafting, but it was used as like a little highlight of like, and usually every year we can find somebody because our organization does housing creation, does advocacy work, and then also does small business support. Usually somebody who benefits from one program also ends up benefiting from another, and we're able to paint a bigger picture of like the services that we step in to provide that are otherwise lacking in our communities. Thanks for asking.
Thanks, Ella. Whitney, please go ahead.
Okay, so one of the things about our MEI program, the Municipal Engagement Initiative program at CHAPA, is really about building coalitions that are in support of affordable housing, right? And so when we elevate sort of our wins, we're able to do that when our coalition, like we sort of like elevate the coalition itself. That's sort of really our model. So I share that to say that one of the things that one of our coalitions has done, Housing Medford, more recently that I think is pretty interesting. They have this sort of story sharing series that they've been doing on social media, and they will share quick quotes around members of the community that are sharing challenges around housing, right? And they're not long, they're not, you get the point pretty quickly, but when you hear them twice, 3 times a week, different stories over and over and over, you start to anticipate them and look for them. And they're sad. They're stories that say, I'm tired. It's like from a high school student, and he's like, I'm tired of helping my friends pack every weekend because no one can no longer afford to live in Medford. And, this is my third friend who this weekend I'm helping pack. Right. And that was it. That was the post. Right. And the next week it's about, someone who has been seeking affordable housing and because they have a child who has a disability, and like there's nothing that's accessible, and they have, might be losing their voucher soon if they don't find something, right? And it's like really snippy, but it's also like this whole series that's developed out of that. And I think the strategy is also how do you connect it to impact and policy change and even fundraising, right? And how that elevates the work. But I thought that was like more interesting recent model that one of our coalitions have been doing on social media and really trying to amplify it further.
Thanks for that. I think that also just speaks to the different ways that we can go about doing this, right? And the importance of like building a strategy. I think one of the things that I love about that idea is that, and I think this, Aaron, you said this, and Ella, you too, but like everybody isn't going to go to a meeting, right? So how do you get some of these messages to the folks that aren't there? And social media is a great way. I think social media has changed a lot over the last couple of years, but it still remains a really good way when you have a strong network to get a story, a short snippet of something out to folks. And I think kind of to your point there, Whitney, at the end is just kind of how are you connecting those messages to some kind of action? Like how are you using those stories? What's the call to action at the end of this social media post, right? Is it just visit the website to get more information? Is it go to the meeting next week? Is it this, that, or the other? And I think that's really important too. Okay, I'm gonna share this and talk through it a little bit. I saw Jamia hit us with the 10-minute warning, and I still have not shared this toolkit, so I'm like, I probably should do that at some point here. This is going to be really overwhelming when I first share it, and I'm just going to talk through it a little bit, and then we'll let folks ask questions. But can you all see my screen? Okay, cool. So this is a toolkit, and like I said, this will be in the slides that will go out afterwards. And there are a bunch of links in here that I'm not going to click open right now because it will make a whole bunch of a mess for the screen sharing. But the core takeaway from this and why I'm putting this up here is if like the first half of our conversation earlier before we got into this breakout was really kind of like me talking through some connecting what you all have talked about in the past to a narrative change framework. What this is on the screen is really the how-tos of communications and communications planning. So there's a lot of like tools and templates in here. And this kind of walks through the 3 phases of that process that I laid out, right? So the first being the planning, second being implementation, and the third being evaluation. And there are kind of links in here to kind of help more specifically define some of those things, set out some key terms, and help you all work through some of this. So first, just want to say, and I think I acknowledged this earlier, but this is an old toolkit that we made that was made for another project at HRA a couple years ago. And so you'll notice that when you do click these things open, the branding and all of that kind of stuff is old and outdated. But that's because this is an older toolkit that is still really sufficient. But leaving that aside, I just want to get into the content of this for a second and then let you all ask questions. But at a high level, like really the first thing that we think about when we are doing this kind of like communications planning, like communications strategizing, and we talked about how important that was at the beginning of this breakout group. But the first thing that we're really thinking about doing is defining goals, defining our audience, and defining our objectives. It's just like step one. And I think that we all implicitly do this in different ways. But what's really helpful about communications framing to this work is getting this stuff on paper. I cannot overstate how helpful it has been for me at times to like take the step back and do this planning up front, because it helps people get some of the assumptions that they had out loud and put those in conversation with other people's assumptions to like make something that's really refined. And so having a clear goal, having a specific audience, I think one of the things that I've become known for at HRA is when someone is like, we need to tell this group of people a thing, they'll say a group of people that's just so big and nebulous that my answer will be, that's not an audience. And people are like, you can't come to Edward and say, this is the audience we have, because he's going to say, that's not an audience. Because sometimes we do that. We kind of say, oh, our audience is everyone in the state of Massachusetts. I hate to say it, but that's not really an audience. It's not specific enough to do anything with, right? So when we think about our audience, we need to be really, really thoughtful and specific. And then the third thing is our objectives. And so the objectives are kind of born out of this combination of goals and audience. So if you select audiences and you're like, these are the people that we want to talk, these are the people that we want our communications to impact in some way, your objectives are kind of saying how exactly you're going to do that per audience. So going on the housing theme, right? If one of our audiences in the housing space is folks that have like lawmaking power in the state of Massachusetts, right? That's one of our audiences. And our goal is at a high level just to increase awareness or commitment to certain policies related to housing. We might have objectives that are really, really specific to that audience of lawmakers to say, we want them to know that this policy is out there. We want them to believe that this policy will increase the stock of affordable housing. And we want them to act, the thing we want them to do is to actually show up to events and to speak to and support a bill or policy, whatever the case might be. So that's really like, that's always step number one. And so that's why it's in between on the far left, it's between the community partnership strategy and mass media strategy. It doesn't matter what kind of communications effort you're going to do. The first step is always define your goal, audience, and objectives. And when we share this, there's a template that you all can kind of see, and it'll help you work through that. And then depending on which path you're going, whether you're kind of doing a community partnership strategy or a mass media strategy, so thinking like social media or something else, there are kind of like pathways for you to work with in this toolkit. So I'm not going to talk about these in as much detail, but kind of going across, the first column is kind of thinking a little bit more about research, how you develop research, how you plan to develop research. And then we start thinking about engagement. So when we're looking at the top level, in our community partnership strategy, we're thinking about engagement and how we're going to gather engagement. And then we're thinking about collaboration. And then finally, evaluation. Evaluation is super important. On the bottom, you're thinking about how you make a research plan. And then you're moving to thinking about where you're going to kind of fill out a communications plan. So you're thinking about channels, the calls to action. I just mentioned that with Whitney's example. The formats for your messaging. Are you using social media? Are you going to do like a big ad campaign? What's it going to be? And then the content creation. And again, that's the piece that when people hear communications, they think, yeah, you just got to hop in and do this thing. What's really helpful about this pathway and this toolkit is that it kind of removes that belief a little bit and just makes it really clear that a lot of work goes into our communications, goes in our stories if we're going to use them strategically. And then again, at the very end of this is evaluation, right? If we have goals, did we meet them? And that's something that's a little overlooked sometimes in our communication spaces. So I think we have like a minute or two, and maybe I should have gotten this sooner. But again, I just want to say that you will get this in the slide deck, and I'm available if you ever have any questions or anything for me. But the reason I asked that question about how you've used storytelling in strategic ways to open this and why it spent so much time, it's because you all are doing this. You may not be like using all of these templates and thinking very specifically in, oh, we made a research plan and then we created content. But you all are doing this. And I think we're all always doing this. And what's helpful about the health communications approach and these kinds of toolkits and communications planning toolkits is that it helps us kind of articulate what we're doing, be able to measure and evaluate whether we're achieving our goals. And it helps us like build kind of like teams and partnerships with folks like with internal to our organization, part of other organizations and in the community to make sure that they understand what we're doing beyond just kind of like the products that we show at the end. So I'm going to stop talking again and just want to thank you all for being here and asking questions and just being willing to hop in and humor the questions I've asked. And I know the timer is going, so I'm gonna stop. And if anyone has any last thoughts, but we'll see you all in the big room.
About 30 seconds if anybody has a quick question.
All right. If not, we'll see you all in the big room.
You'll be whisked away in just a second, Kate. It'll happen automatically. Or yeah, we can just click leave.
Thanks for reminding me to record.
About that.
No, it's fine. Well, yeah, does anyone want to like say what their favorite form of storytelling is as like a breakout, like check-ins question?
I can go. My name is Claire Hoffman. I use she, her pronouns, and I would say that books tend to be my favorite form of storytelling. Really enjoy that they can kind of be creative in the form that they take and can learn the story from multiple perspectives at once.
I think that I like to use the idea of a book, particularly some older books like children's books. And even if I set the space with using Once Upon a Time, or have you ever been to a place where you thought the world was perfect, and then actually intertwine a real life story. I really like to use real life experiences and telling a story and kind of maybe aligning a fairy tale with the analogies that come in the fairy tale. Yeah, the real life storytelling to me is the most impactful and a way to kind of reach the audience with being sure that you know who's in your audience as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Deb or Liz, if you would like to.
You know, it's in the telling. I'm a reader. I don't listen to audio books at all because I like creating my own pictures.
Mm-hmm.
That said, I also use pictures to describe things. So I guess for me, the visual, whether it's words or diagrams or things like that. I'm a scientist at heart, so I'm sort of technical as opposed to
Yeah,
to prose but for me it's very visual and less auditory.
yeah, definitely makes sense. Yeah. Liz, I don't know if you're there. Um, well, yes. Cool.
I'm literally a fly on the wall just listening to your stories. I enjoy a good story. I am a visual learner, and I used to be a reader, but I'm definitely more TV now. But I watch like shows from the 90s that I've seen like a million times. But I do feel like storytelling is important, and I think that when you share your experiences, especially over food or like coffee, people open up more. So but I was a fine arts minor, so I love the visuals. I love the you know paintings and drawings and doodles and everything like that. So I just am really listening to what you all are saying, and I appreciate you sharing them. So thank you very much for having
Yeah.
me.
Yeah, and like I like to like start off with this question because everybody has a different way of what like captures them, right? Like what is it that like makes you um really like a book, really like a TV show? And if you think about it, a lot of these books, TV shows, podcasts, and audiobooks, they all have a genre. They all have like a plot line. And like what when you think of like the books that you're reading, specifically sci-fi, what are the current systems that they're paralleling, you know? And one of the reasons why I really like so so this is an introduction to visionary fiction, which is sort of my framework with how I like to tell stories. And like when I made my zine, like this is sort of what I kept drawing back to. And it was like vision visionary fiction is like fantastical art that helps us understand and challenge existing power structures and support us in imagining paths to dreaming and creating more just worlds. And so, you know, I think when we're so used to, as people who work in nonprofit or people who work in different like movement building spaces, like it's so hard to imagine different worlds, especially when you're always just fighting like the system. So like what would you imagine? Like if you can imagine a different system, what would it look like? It's sort of like where I like to draw from visionary fiction. And one thing that I like to point out is like is like all organizing is science fiction. A world without poverty, a world without homelessness, a world without prison, a world without police brutality, a world without borders, a world without oppression, and a world without war is all science fiction. Like we have not lived in a world where these things existed, right? But it would be so powerful for us if we could imagine that, like if we could start imagining like what those worlds would look like. Because once we, you know, destroy the system or like create, like do the work to like dismantle the system, we have to create a new system, right? And what does that look like when we have to start like turning our brains and like start thinking creatively, like how are we going to rebuild the world once it comes crashing down? So that's sort of like how I like to use this like visionary fiction. And like they has like main components to it. So like these are like principles of visionary fiction is like okay, you sent so you know, Tracy says that she likes a lot of lived experiences. So do I. And like one of the aspects of like principle of visionary fiction is like you start with the leadership of the marginalized and the most affected. So you look through the eyes of the oppressed, intersectionality. You engage with power inequality, make visible systems of power, imagine different relationships to power. So like a good example is like Star Wars is like really popular in sci-fi. But if you really think about it, it's really imperialism as science fiction. Like they are just replicating these like different types of like power inequalities in science fiction. It's not yes, the story Skywalker is technically a marginalized person, but he also is sort of like uh he was destined to be the like hero. But nobody in this world is destined to do anything. Like nobody is destined to change the world. We're all changing it like together. So and like um and so like and then you want to make sure that it's from bottom up, like you want to make sure that you're this is where the lived experiences comes into place. Like what are the lived experiences of people? Like what are they currently going through? And you want to make sure that it's not neutral, because when you don't stand, when you don't like make a point for one side or the other, then you're not really advancing or you know but yeah, I can take a step back, and if you guys have any questions about like anything I just said, because I sort of have been talking a lot.
I'll just say that I really love the framing that you're providing. And I I read a lot of kind of sci-fi, but I hadn't really thought about this before, that like the world that we want to see is at the moment science fiction. And so like let's use our storytelling to be able to vision what we want to see. So this is all really resonating with me, and appreciate the framing.
Yeah, I want to echo that. I have never thought in those terms. And it's always an aha moment when it gets put into terms that I haven't thought in. And I just this morning I sat down and I was writing a vision, and I write visions a lot, and I never thought of them in terms of science fiction, but they really are what ifs. What
Yeah.
is possible? What is, and in science fiction, it's often what technology will bring us. But if you put the technology stuff over there and just think about how we live. Anyway, I'm fascinated by this, and it really resonates with where I started my day today.
Yeah. And like technology is also like, I think part of the reason too, like we don't think about science fiction as like how we live currently, because it's all tech focused, right? And like tech hasn't, at one point it was bottom up, right? Now we have like these tech conglomerates that have changed the way we interact with technology too. So like a lot of the tech that we'll have wouldn't be quote unquote like following like science fiction rules. Like we don't have hoverboards yet. From like whatever the show, I forgot what the movie is called, Back to the Future or whatever. But yeah. And so an example, so like I want to show you guys like sort of like an example that I did with my zine. So I did the zine, and this is like Chelsea Chronicles, like navigating life in transit. And so like these are pictures that residents sent me, people, my coworkers, and like, I just asked them to send me pictures of like Chelsea. And this is sort of what I got. And then so this is a story that I had created with a coworker. Well, actually my coworker created the story, and I just helped her edit it. And basically we've been doing a lot of like outreach to like seniors in like public housing, and like we hear their stories, and like a lot of it, and so basically this is a story about Bill, who's living on a fixed income, and he has to depend on social service to meet his needs, like a lot of retirees. He like he like worked as an iron worker, and like he contributed to the Massachusetts infrastructure, but he's unable to work. And so part of a little tidbit of the zine, like I had to connect data to it. And so that's sort of where it says across all nine um, communities, 15% of those surveys reported that they cannot work because of disability. And then it says Bill spends most of his day in the state of sadness, isolation, eagerly waiting for the seasons to change, you know? Because one of the things that a lot of seniors told us was that during the winter, they're very isolated. They just stay home, because it's unsafe for them to be outside because they could like trip and fall. And then that would lead to increased health. And so and then and then at the end it's like it's not an ideal life. Bill feels stuck and hates relying on others for resistance. So when summer arrives, Bill fondly reflects on his memory at the beach, and regrettably using public transportation in his wheelchair makes it nearly impossible for him to get there. And my I obviously like I wasn't creating like I can stop sharing screen. I wasn't creating like a super long story. It was just like a short story, and sort of like this is a real life example, of a lot of seniors who are living in these like public housings, and like, seniors in this country get sort of like abandoned in a way. Like they were useful for a really long time. I know like a lot of younger generations have like um yeah, that's so true. Like it's not just seniors, but like everyone. But it's just like, these generational differences, like why are like seniors isolated? Like why can we not come together? So there's a lot of different things. But yeah, that's my short presentation that I had for you guys. And I'm willing to do like the questions and stuff. But if you also have any like suggestions or questions, but yeah, I can pause there.
Ruth, I just have a thought, and I really appreciate that we're actually elevating and putting the art and the purpose and the impact of storytelling in the realm of making real change, particularly when there's injustices involved. Many folks want to use the data and the research and all these strategic kind of busyness to actually move people, but you creatively utilize the data in a way that is necessary but not so focused on the data. I hate that the data actually kind of distracts from the real impact and the real meaning. So what you have demonstrated to me is the use of the data in a way that is necessary, but it's not a distraction and it's not taking away from the real message. And I think as we move forward and put this storytelling into space and encourage others to actually lead with the storytelling. One of the things too that I just came up with or kind of learned is getting organizations to lead with their ethos. And what that means is for them to lead with what's important to you as an organization. Who do you want the community to see you as? And that starts with a story and not the
Yeah.
data of how long you've been involved or how long you've existed, how many people you've hired, how many folks graduated. Like all of this stuff we lead with first, with the idea of creating folks on job descriptions and websites and all that. So we are leading with our ethos. What's important to us? Who do we want to be? What are we reminded of when we see our community? So I love this story. I love infographics. I'm trying to get a little bit better with using places, technology like Canva. Did you use Canva to kind of get your graphics? That's a beautiful place. I'm not very familiar with it, but I
I
think it
love Canva.
offers a lot of tools and a lot of ways to kind of align the visual aspects with the story. So great job, Ruth. Keep up
Thank
the good
you.
work. Love it.
Thank you. I really like one of the points that you said was one of the main points of why I did the zine the way I did, because basically they had 8
Did you
years of
call it
like
a what? A
a
zine?
zine, a zine. Yeah.
Zeen?
Zine.
Zine, zine. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. And like it was like a culmination of 8 years of data, and like we had to create like a project. And I was like, well, data is often also like extracted from communities, like communities like Chelsea that I work in, and like have no really like, how are you going to present the data to people from Chelsea? Like how, if not everyone has like a science background, how are they going to understand like um 49%, or and so like part of the reason was to try to make it more accessible for people, and like storytelling does have a nice way of like combining the two, you know but yeah.
Yeah, I loved your use of the word extracted from, because it's so described how we separate the data from the people, or we separate the data from the community. And it just hit me as you used that word, and that the stories, the people are the data, and we forget that data are people. 49%, how many people are, I hear a lot about homelessness in our community, which is very invisible, or very rural community, and the homelessness is really invisible. And yet I talk to people who describe situations, and it's my only connection. I hear the numbers and I think, how can there be 70 people who are homeless when I see none of them? But when I hear a story and it sort of places them, it takes on a whole different context. It reconnects that extracted data to the people who are impacted by the issues that are causing the problem for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's so true. Like, people are the data, right?
Yeah.
Like, if people say, like, in the story, like 15% of Chelsea residents are disabled, then that means 50% of people cannot work. They live on a fixed income, so they have to like go to food pantries to survive. And like with the little money that they have, can they even make rent? Are they like, because they live on a fixed income, are they homeless? Like these are questions that are like are not really thought about if you present data like 50% of people in Chelsea are disabled. That's it. That's how it ends. And you're right. Like one of the frustration is sucks that like we do lean on data and research quite often, a lot more than we do with storytelling and like people's like lived experiences instead.
I was going to say an example in our community, again, we talk about housing, is, okay, do we need emergency cot housing? Do we need transitional housing? Do we need supported housing? What are are they mental health supports? Are they substance use supports? Not just, well, we have a homeless problem, so let's create a shelter. But are we going to create something that's actually going to meet the need of the people who need it? And you can only get through the stories. You can't get through the numbers.
Yeah. And each person has a different situation, right? So I think that's like really hard too. But yeah, that's why I like storytelling, because I feel like people find little things to like resonate with others in a way that data or like research is hard to like resonate with other people, unless you like really like research and like you're like super into it.
I think we
Oh,
should
I
get.
have a question. Oh,
Go ahead, sorry.
I just have a question. So you have this data report, you pull out like components to create the stories. And in the story, so you're creating an actual like little piece of uh like creative, it's like a merge between nonfiction and fiction because it's like based on
Yeah.
real life, but not. And how are you connecting it to the change you want to see? Like you tell the story about like the reality of it. How are you then connecting it to like that that new world,
hmm
that new vision that you have? How do you loop that back?
Yeah, that's a really good question actually, because like I think that's part of the struggle too, right? Is like my short story is short. It really wasn't about like creating that new world, like what would be different for Bill, right? Um, I had a different agenda at the moment. And I think that's sort of like very difficult when you live in a society like we live currently where, you know, creating and imagining is sort of, they don't want you to do that. You know, they don't want you to create. They don't want you to think of new worlds where like poverty doesn't exist. Because then how would people be like, how would people be, you know? So I think it's part of like, I think that's sort of where I'm currently trying to do. So I'm actually like working on a separate zine and trying to do more of that, like um imagining new worlds, or like how do we, like one thing that's really different is like how younger generation has sort of changed the way like office culture is, right? Like it's we're a little bit more, have more of a work-life balance. We understand that our life is not all about working, and that in itself is a subtle difference, but it helps everybody like, you know, live in this society a little better. I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, I think I'm still struggling with that.
Wondering if you could talk more about how you distribute the zine, because I sometimes find like when I do a project, I would love to focus more on storytelling and like do a podcast with residents I'm talking about, but you know, without having the Boston Globe's name behind me. And I'm wondering like how do I get the word out, have like a platform that's big enough to start those narrative shifts?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think for me, the zine, I like shared it out to the residents. We had like a little event here and we shared it out. Um, I got CLF was one of the partners that I was worked with, and we did like a little blog. Um, and so that sort of got outreach, but still, like I'm still, and I reached out to like Chelsea Public Libraries and Boston Public Libraries to like share the zine to them too. Um, so we're still like in the process of sharing it out, and like even doing this, like I'm sharing out the zine, right?
Totally.
I mean, I'm like making connections. So you guys could like, I'll send you guys, I can send you guys the link so you guys could
That'd
like
be great.
Is it just digital or do you also print it out? I'm just curious, again, in terms of access.
Yeah, I printed out 100 copies. One aspect that I didn't say is like I printed out 50 English copies and then I translated the zines. So there's 50 English and 50 Spanish. And I have like the Spanish ones right now that I need to distribute. The English ones were pretty gone, but yeah. So I printed out. It's sort of expensive to print, like nicely. Like the word zine is sort of incorrect because like the purpose of a zine is to make printing easy, and like the book, it's more of like a magazine in a way because the printing that I use is a little bit more expensive, but I could just technically just print it and like with color and then but paste it together, like staple it together and then share it out that way too. So like that's the part of the zine is like nice, is that you could share it out to people all over if you wanted to. But printing is sort of the more of the like cost in a lot of this stuff.
I think each of us should dedicate and commit not maybe necessarily a significant amount of time to inspiring and encouraging the people that we work with, the folks in our community, to begin telling a story, because I feel like so many people are still stuck on the data collection. I teach a class at Bay Path right now, and one of the assignments is to tell a story. And the first thing they start with is a summary of their project. They have no clue how to tell a story, none. So I've actually copied and pasted and cut and give them ideas and suggestions on how to tell the story. So I think we need to kind of support and continue to put this vibe into our communities, particularly places where we want to have impact on encouraging folks to tell the story. Because a lot of folks, believe it or not, community leaders and organizational leaders financial institutional leaders, they are afraid to tell the story. They feel like somebody's going to crack up at them or laugh at them or dismiss them because they're not giving them facts and they're not giving them data. And that's one of the things I do in my work, like, is encourage this approach. Like, you have to change your approach. You've been reporting and giving spreadsheets and all of these sorts of data sources, and the impact lies in the story. So I'm hoping that this was one of Jamia, this was one of the best sessions ever for me. That's just my personal perspective right now. This was dynamite for me. I love being here, and I think that we're really getting to how we're going to move the shift. And the question you asked about how you tie the story back and encourage change, I have some ideas about that, but I'll leave it alone right now because we have short for time. So thank you. Great job.
I just want to say that, like, one aspect of that too is, like, many people think that they're not creative or they're not artists, they're not graphic designers, they're not storytellers. I never consider myself my artist, and then I made the zine, and then everybody was telling me I'm an artist and a designer and a crafter, and it's like, you don't know until you create something, is the caveat, right? You don't know until you create if your work is worth anything. And honestly, your work will be worth something because art is in the eye of the beholder. There's no, yes, we have like professional degrees about fine arts and all that type of stuff, but like art, and at the end of the day, was supposed to be something that we community have together and we could do together. And I think it's changing people's mindset about, can they do it? Are they artists? Can they write stories? And like very encouraging them and like basically forcing them to do it. But that's just like how I had to do it for the zine. Was very difficult. Like, one of the parts was very difficult to get submissions from community residents because they were like, I don't know how to do art. I don't know how to write poems. I don't know how to tell stories. But yet they're they do tell stories, right? Like, they have like auditory stories, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting about who's creative, who's not, or who's capable of telling a story. I think it's something we lose in the monotony of like the work, and like we need to take a step back and think about it in this way. We also have to create space for us intentionally do that kind of work. So I love that. I mean, we always put like creative. I mean, I think people who are not, it's not naturally inclined to do it, put like creativity in the back burner. And um it's hard to like make that a part of your like routine, to be like, even if I do like 5 minutes writing prompt or something every day, or a couple times a week, like that gets me thinking, or I just doodle something every day, like, I think it's fun to think about how we can be more creative. um I also just like the sort of like, it's kind of like kitschy to do like a little, like to have this type of an artifact, I want to say, of like this moment of this work and the data, to have like a sort of, it almost looks like it's almost like a comic book kind of thing of like this work. And to be able to like have that be part of the journey, but also I like what you like your response about how you think about like that next thing, about how do you bring it into the vision you want to see. Yeah. You have just one more minute. I'm actually going to close out the room. So
Well,
you have a minute though.
okay. Well, thank you so much for joining. I really like talking about this type of stuff, and you guys should read Octavia Butler. She's amazing. That's all I'll say. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for sharing all of this with us. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks. This was wonderful.
Thank you.
Indeed. Great.
Well, it is my pleasure to introduce for this breakout room the team from Lawrence CommunityWorks, Harvey Bonilla, Jamil Martinez, and Jessica Andors. Lawrence CommunityWorks is rooted in a network organizing approach that prioritizes building relationships and social capital among Lawrence's residents and provides a foundation for project and program development and collective action. This session will highlight how they use specific storytelling tools within their work to build initial connections, and also have begun to invest in their marketing capacity to capture member experiences and stories and promote those narratives internally and externally. I'm going to just take some notes during our conversation today, but otherwise we'll largely be silent. So I will turn it over to the Lawrence CommunityWorks team.
Great. Thank you. I'm just going to set up the conversation real briefly and then turn it over to Jamil and then Harvey. As Megan, said, we as an organization, although like our project that's funded through HRIA is not, it's a very real estate focused project, and it's a redevelopment of a whole area of the city. But that redevelopment itself is rooted in a community organizing process that has taken place over years to surface kind of resident concerns and aspirations around the kind of city and resources that they want to have. And so we're not really going to talk that much about our HRIA project today, but more about our organizing process and then some of the evolutions that we've made recently. So Jamil is our director of network organizing, and I'll let her introduce herself and say a little bit about how she came up through the organization, and then she's going to talk about some of the tools that we use, and actually maybe even lead you guys through a small like demo of one of them. And then Harvey has actually Harvey can also talk a little bit about his long history and background with LCW, and then the role that he's currently in, and what we're trying to do with that new role in order to capture and promote some of these stories. So with that, I'll hand it over to Jamil.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jamil Martinez. I'm the Director of Network Organizing here at Lawrence CommunityWorks. So I'll tell you about myself very quickly. I started here as a volunteer in 2013, quickly became one of the facilitators for neighbor circles and community education circles. One is in the neighborhood and one in the schools. From there, I became a parent ambassador. I have a very strong voice for advocating for parents. And then from there, I became a community organizer and now the director of network organizing. So from 2013, my journey has been here building at LCW. So one of the things that we are going to be sharing with you today is one of the neighbor circles, which is something that we do with everything that we do at LCW is about building relationships. But this one, we bring it straight into the community so that the neighbors can get to know each other, build those relationships, work together as a team, talk about concerns, ideas and suggestions that they want to bring up, and build relationships not only amongst themselves, but also with any politicians, the police department if they have to, the fire department, anybody to make their environment and their neighborhood a better place to live, where they can all grow together. Jess, do we know if we're able to do the map exercise?
I think we should be able to do it. I've Harvey's a co-host. Maybe Jamil, you could describe the map exercise first as a part, like that's sort of the kickoff of the neighbor circles process, and give a little background about the neighbor circles and then Harvey could kind of share a screen with a map on it. Do we?
Yeah, I've got Google Earth pulled up, so just let me know.
Oh, good. Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Sorry, guys, for that. All right, so Lawrence CommunityWorks really focuses on hearing the voice of the community members. They shift what we're gonna do here as an organization. If we need to build more properties, we always go back to the community, figure out what are the needs that are out there, what are the concerns, what are their suggestions. Their voice is very, very powerful in the decision making that we do as an organization. Neighbor circles, we knock on doors to see who is willing to open their door to bring neighbors together to talk about that neighborhood. Usually we have a host, maybe 6 to 9 neighbors join. We've had 80 people in an apartment, like we've had 10 to 15 people in an apartment. It all depends on the neighborhood and any concerns they may have or any projects they want to work together on. So this neighbor circles are 3 nights. They can be very consecutive or they can be 3 nights throughout the month. We also do follow-up meetings after the 3 nights. The first night we do something called the map exercise where the neighbors get to know each other. We talk about where we were born, how did we get here, what was our journey here, and why are we still here? So is that something that I think we should try it so that we can model it so that you can get a sense of how it feels? Remember that we do this within the neighbors themselves and also at the school level, between parents and teachers and teachers and teachers. And now we've implemented it with Lawrence High School students, where the students can do it with the teachers. So you modify this towards what's the audience that you have and what works best for you guys. Right?
And I just wanted to add to that. So normally we would be doing this in person with people, and we would have like a big paper map up on the wall where people are actually tracing their journey. And the kind of caveat I want to put around this is that we have felt like this is a really powerful tool to use in our community. It's a very immigrant community with a lot of folks from the Caribbean and Central and South America coming in. So that story of like a journey and making a journey over like a physical journey is a really grounding way for people to be able to share something about themselves that they know intimately, like they know their own story of their journey, right? So it's like if you're a little scared to speak out in public or a little awkward, this is like a nice way to just ease into that. And then the map provides a little prop for you so that you have something to do with your hands while you're doing it as well. And we're going to try and recreate that a little bit in this group with the Google Earth, which we haven't done before. We've never done like a neighbor circle via Zoom, but we're just going to see how that works. So.
Harvey, are you able to pull up or someone else the map?
Yes, I need to give Zoom permission though, so it's telling me I need to quit and relaunch it. So give me 1 second.
Well, that's okay. In the meantime, I'll keep going. Remember, it's 3 nights. The first night, this is what we focus on. We do provide dinner for all the families that join us. I do have kids activities for the kids just to make sure that they're entertained while the adults are having the conversations. In these conversations, you can cry, you can laugh. There's a lot of empathy that goes around the space. Remember that, like Jess was saying, a big majority of our population is undocumented. And so their journey here can trigger emotions that you already had and bring about experiences that are alike. So Harvey might not come back. I don't know. I don't know. But
Yeah, I think we should just start. It would take a while to have everybody in the room do it. So what Jamil and I were thinking was she's going to model what it is to just sort of tell your story like this. And then if we could have a couple of other volunteers from the group who would be willing to do it as well. And I think we do have Harvey back. So Harvey's going to try and type destinations into the Google map as people are saying, like if I was doing it and I was like, well, I was born in this town in upstate New York, Harvey will take us there. And then I moved here when I was 5 and there when I was 15, or, then we'll sort of take you around in that way. So Jamil's going to start us off with that.
Sorry, I'm back in, but I do need co-hosts preferences again, please.
So I can't set you to be co-host, but I just changed it so that everybody should be able to share their screen now. Do you see that as an option?
Yes.
Okay.
Technology at its best, guys.
Can you guys see it? Are we here?
Yes, we're here.
All right.
This is awesome. Thank you, Harvey. All right. I was born in Puerto Rico and I traveled to Massachusetts when I was 5 years old. We moved straight to Lawrence. My father was in the Army, but then because of my health conditions, we had to move here because Children's Hospital was able to offer the services that I needed. And I actually lived in Lawrence for 30 years. So I really didn't travel much outside of Puerto Rico and Lawrence, but in Lawrence, we did move around a lot. So at the beginning, when we first arrived here, we were moving every year to a different apartment. So every year, depending on the school zone that I was on, I was going into a different school. I had my child when I was 19 years old. I became a single mother. And being a single mother, I started educating myself in the importance of my daughter's education, and I became a fierce advocate for her education as well as others. I was a PTO mom. I was always in the school. I think I had attachment issues with my baby, and that's why I was always in the school. I wanted to make sure she was getting all the services she needed and she was being treated correctly. So I became one of those moms who volunteered all the time and was always in the school. From there, I started working with children myself. I got a bachelor's degree in human services and early childhood. That brought me to Lawrence CommunityWorks. When I was working with the children, I realized that, yes, you can help and educate the child, but I wanted to make sure that the family was receiving services overall, almost like a holistic approach for the whole family. And that is what LCW does, which was why I came here. I started volunteering here at Lawrence CommunityWorks. I actually wrote a paper on Lawrence CommunityWorks and the work that they were doing with the parents and the neighbors, which is what I presented for my bachelor's. Then I became a parent ambassador here at Lawrence CommunityWorks. I also became a community organizer and now the director of network organizing. Throughout my journey, it hasn't always been easy. As a single mother, you struggle. I can say that I lived in a car with my child. I've had food insecurities. My finances weren't always where they needed to be. But what I've been through has shaped who I have become and where I am today. I can put myself in other people's shoes as they're speaking because I feel like I've experienced a lot. For someone who's not too old and not too young, I won't say my age, but that's my journey. And so I would love to hear from somebody else just to see, because I only traveled from one place to another and then stayed located. But I also stayed located because I was very sick growing up. It wasn't, anything out of there. Jess, would you like to go next and then we can open the floor for someone else?
Sure. I can do that. I'll try and be quick. So I was born in a small town in upstate New York called Minetto, Minetto is how you spell it. Min. Yeah, there it is, right there. And I lived in that fairly rural community until I was about 5 years old. And then my parents moved us down to Staten Island, in New York. Staten Island, for those of you who don't know it, is the only Republican borough of New York City. It was an interesting place to grow up. My family is Jewish. Staten Island is very segregated, or was when I was growing up very segregated. There was a large African American community. I grew up in a somewhat mixed family. I had cousins who were African American, and I also grew up in an area that I was one of the few Jewish families, and it was a lot of Irish American and Italian American families, and had a lot of interesting experiences dealing, kind of with anti-Semitism for me, and racism directed at my cousins when I was growing up. So, and also grew up in this very lefty Jewish social justice oriented family, right? So that really, those experiences kind of really shaped some of my values in life and some of my understanding around some of these issues. I went to college in Massachusetts, and then so that was my first experience of the Bay State, and then moved out to San Francisco after college for about 4 years, worked in the nonprofit sector there, loved it, but I don't think if you grow up on the East Coast, it's hard to feel like you deserve to live in a place as nice as San Francisco with such good food and beautiful mountains all around and so on. So I did wind up coming back to Massachusetts for graduate school. And that was how I became involved in Lawrence, was actually in a class in graduate school. And I think it's kind of ironic that in some ways, Lawrence is like a little bit like when I first came here was a little bit like the Staten Island of my youth. Like there was this older, entrenched Irish American and Italian American population that was not very accepting of the newer, Latino immigrants who had come into the city over, 30 and 40 years before I got there, but that were still at that point considered, more new. And older people in the city would refer to folks as just the Spanish and lump everybody together. And I think that for me, working in Lawrence was like being able to address all the things that I was upset about in Staten Island, but without the emotional baggage of being in Staten Island. And so that is where I have lived ever since and made it my home and raised my son and family. And that's I was part of the restarting of Lawrence CommunityWorks and started as a community organizer here. And that's what I have done ever since, is just sort of work in and grow and now eventually run LCW. So that's my story in a nutshell. Would anyone else like to trace their story on the map as Harvey types in your destinations? We don't usually have this problem in Lawrence. There's usually plenty of volunteers of people who wouldn't mind speaking. Megan, do you want to give it a whirl?
Sure, I would be happy to. I was giggling a little bit just in your story, just because I had the opposite. Is I grew up outside of San Francisco and moved to the East Coast. I was like, I don't deserve these seasons, but
Yeah.
I grew up in Berkeley, California, which is right outside of San Francisco, in a very working class family, but one that was very close and very close knit, and liked to do DIY projects together, sometimes to our detriment. And I was lucky enough to go out to college in Boston and ended up meeting my spouse there after I graduated. So stayed for a couple more years. And I started working at HRA during that time. So I have worked in the office, which is not something that a lot of our staff can actually claim at this point. My spouse's career actually brought us back to California, and we were in Sacramento for the last 8 years, which is like northern central California, and is close to where my dad's family is living, or my dad lives. So that was really cool to get to spend time with them. And yeah, and then just this summer, a month and a half ago, my spouse's career once again moved us, this time to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, which is where my spouse is from and where my in-laws live. and hopefully a final resting stop for us, because as you can see on the map, I've crisscrossed a couple of times and I'm ready to put some roots down. But very lucky for the communities that I've been able to build along the way through my work with HRA, through my friends and family. And yeah, just grateful and tired of moving.
That's awesome. You have traveled.
Yeah, I'm done.
Yeah. You know, I'm thinking about it as if I were one of the teachers and one of the parents, and I'm listening and I'm like, okay, if that would have been a parent telling me that they've moved that much within a year, how am I working with that family and helping that child? How am I understanding the needs of that child? The same thing for community members. As we are listening, we're like, wow, this family has really moved around a lot within different neighborhoods. How can we help them fit into this neighborhood and make sure that they understand the power within their own voice, and the changes that they can bring upon them?
Yeah, it's like it's nice when you do it on a physical map, right? Because then everyone's stories start to build on each other and you see like the network of lines on the map. And that's when we've had, we'll have people who've lived on the same block for a couple of years, but didn't realize that they grew up in the same town in the Dominican Republic, right? So then it creates a sense of connection and a point at which you can bond or have a starting point for conversation. And I think for us, this is really important because if you're going to start, like, there's a lot of things that we could get upset about and fight about in Lawrence, right? And that, like, the affordable housing issue is a huge issue here. There's community health issues. There's, massive, like, issues with the public education system. But you can't just leap into those higher level conversations with people right away for the most part. You really, like, there's a lot of this pre-organizing and ground building and relationship building work that is absolutely necessary. For us, it's an end in and of itself, but it's also necessary if people are going to be able to come together and fight together on something that is a bigger issue for them, right? And in order for people to create a collective story together, they have to first share those personal stories with each other. And it does create this sense of understanding, and as Jamil just was talking about, right? It's one thing for like a parent to say to a teacher, oh, we've moved around a lot. But if they get up in front of a group of people and actually trace their journey in the city, first we lived here, then we had to leave here because the landlord, wanted to rent the house to his cousin. And so they kicked us out. And then we moved here. And then I lost my job and I couldn't pay the rent. And so we moved here, right? Then you get a real sense of like the depth and texture of somebody's story. And then people realize that they also had some similar experiences or, lived on the same block for a while. And so it creates these connections between people. So, and Jamil, do you want to maybe talk a little bit about how we use these conversations to like shape the topic or conversation at our annual meeting, for instance, like around the housing issue?
Yeah, so the housing issue came about because the residents were talking about it. The residents were saying something has to give. Who can help? We can't survive. We can't pay the rent. The landlords are kicking us out, or they're raising our rent $500. In the state of Massachusetts, there is no limit as to how much they can raise. They can do that. And so we decided, let's bring the community into our space and have a bigger community conversation on what are your issues? What are you facing currently? And then let's explain what affordable housing is, what we do as a CDC, and what the state of Massachusetts allows. And this brings up the conversation, can we join other nonprofits that are doing campaign work, that are going to the state level, based on your personal story, what can you do? What are you willing to do to join the conversation and join there? We do need to go to the state level to advocate or even go to city council. Are you comfortable enough sharing your story at city council? And if you're not, then you're at the right space, because we can offer facilitation training. We can help you with public speaking. We won't do it for you, but we will hold your hand to make sure that you're able to do it for yourself. So we provide different things. The important thing that we do is making sure that everyone has a voice at the table. Because collectively, then they can make decisions. How can they move forward? Because LCW can do a lot, but it's not our work. It's the community's work. How can they move so that we can go behind them? We never want to be up front. We always want to be behind. We give them the tools that they need to move them forward. Whether it's with us or another organization, or if they want to get politically involved because they see that this is a huge issue and nobody's making any changes. We provide them with those tools so that they can reach those levels.
Yeah. And I think another thing to think about with this work is that this is like never ending, you know, like most stories are not static. And when you're doing this kind of work, like, you know, not to get jargony about it, but like the folks who are creating that dominant narrative, like they're constantly refreshing that, right? They're putting that out there in a ton of different ways all the time. And so this is not a process of like, oh, you know, we're going to go to city council, like we're going to have talk to all these residents, hear their stories, work with them on presenting that, and then it's one visit to city council and our work here is done, right? Like this is a constant process of, and helping residents understand that it's not a one and done either, right? Like this is that in order to get this story out there, you have to find ways to amplify your voice and make it as consistent and persistent. And you know, you're never usually going to have the financial resources to make it as powerful as the dominant narrative, but you can keep eating away at that on the local level all the time, with presence at these things on a continuous basis. And I see Grace has a question, so let's get that in. But then I want to have Harvey talk a little bit about like what he's doing with LCW now and why we made that decision, right? To invest in that kind of capacity. But Grace, you had a question or a comment?
Yeah, well, thank you for the presentation so far and for doing this exercise with us. It's always really powerful to see people's journeys and hear about them. I would have volunteered, but I'm quite young and my journey is like one stop, so it's not too much to talk about. But I'm just curious because this is something I feel is an issue for me personally and for a lot of people that I know. I'm curious what you say to people who really do want to get involved and like show up to public meetings and like city council and whatever, but just don't have the time for it, or like the meetings are, at times when they're working or they're just otherwise, they don't have like the bandwidth to actually like show up and tell their stories. Like, kind of, how do you help them with that? And what do you generally say to someone who expresses that concern about their like lack of ability to actually show up in the way that they want to?
So we currently have someone that, because of their working schedule, is unable to show up and just express their concerns at city council, but they do have the direct number of the city council that represents their district now. And so we make sure that we build that relationship so that that resident feels comfortable enough to send those messages and share their story and their concerns. And then that resident is obviously going to share with another resident. So the city council, they put pressure on that person that's representing that district. The city council can share their stories. We are more than willing as well to share different stories of different residents, but their voices are stronger than ours because they're the ones living in that neighborhood. We're not. Yeah. Despite the work that we do throughout the whole community, that is their neighborhood.
I would say another way that we do that is, and this is a thing we were just able to do this past year because we have Harvey doing what he's doing now. But as part of our annual meeting, because we were focusing it on the affordable housing issue, as that was such a resonant issue for our folks over the past couple of years, we were able to capture video testimonials of folks who wanted to speak and get involved. And they themselves might not have been able to come to the annual meeting, but they had, vetted their testimonial beforehand. And we projected it at annual meeting in a kind of gallery walk that all the other residents and public officials and guests and so on were able to walk through and see and hear that. And that became part of the storytelling at annual meeting, even though the person themselves couldn't be there. And then, that was built upon in the group conversations that we had where we were discussing actions to take around things.
Yeah, it's something we did share on social media as well. So people were like, oh, I want to share my story. I want to share my story, which opened the doors for many residents that didn't know about Lawrence Community Works, right? They had no idea because they just moved to the city, but now they are part of our LCW family, as we call everyone. And they just share their stories, the good and the bad.
So Harvey, do you want to just share? I know we have like limited time, so Harvey, do you want to share a little bit about what your position and how you came to it and what you're doing?
Sure. Yeah. So good morning, everyone. My name's Harvey Bonilla. I am the marketing and communications manager for LCW. Prior to this specific role, I worked over at Movement City for about 5 years. I think in a minute. Okay. But basically the gist of it is that LCW decided to put a big focus on our marketing strategy because we felt it was important for us to be able to tell our stories in our way, in our voice. There's a lot of great work that happens here, and a lot of that stuff kind of either goes swept under the rug or it's just like peer-to-peer kind of knowledge and spotlighting. So what we've done is we've been intentional about putting together like video recaps for events and graduations and being present at like lotteries whenever we do the affordable housing events and stuff like that. So the goal is to essentially be the ones to create our own narrative and tell our own stories, and empower our members and our people to really, get in front of a camera or go on stage and create content that's going to live on all of our platforms, which also serves for like reporting and.
Uh-oh, we're getting kicked out.
I'm not sure why it only kicked out half of us. I apologize. But hopefully we can connect you all together over email. Love to finish hearing what Harvey had to say, but sorry about that.
Just a quick question before we get booted, because I'm obsessed with your map exercise. Do you
okay.
have
Welcome back, everyone. I think that is, everyone is closed out of their breakout room. Well, I don't know. We had some good conversation in our breakout group. I hope you all had some good conversation as well. I would love to hear a few like takeaways from your conversation. If you want to raise your hand or share in the chat, just some things that you're gonna keep with you or you're still resonating on.
I just want to say this was great. I have to run. I hope to see everybody soon. This was really, really amazing and very helpful.
Thanks, Tracy. Jackie.
Sorry about that. I actually did that by accident, but this was also really amazing. I really enjoyed listening to everyone's perspective, and I have new ideas that I'm taking back to my organizations. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackie. Monica?
Yeah, I was in the graphic scribing group, but just want to echo thank you to everyone for the great conversations. The graphic scribing was a great way to think about other ways to tell our stories that we hear, like from the advocates we work with, and potentially use it for internal purposes to talk about our messaging and communication. So thanks. Oh, and thank you to Edward for all of your for your presentation and your notes too.
Thanks, Monica. Any other little tidbits folks want to share?
One of the things that occurred to me during our conversation with our scribe, folks commented on the beauty of it, and Helen was talking about facilitating it. Helen is trained as an epidemiologist. She just got her master's in public health, but she participated in the scribe training just because I asked her to. I think Helen will say yes to anything I ask, so we have to work on that because it's crazy. But then she discovered this amazing gift inside of herself. And I think that's really good metaphor for when we're engaging in community, being sure that we aren't deciding what the capacities of folks who we're working with are. You know, like I can be very paternalistic. We're sitting at very white tables a lot of the time and in white spaces. Sometimes I'm reluctant to send community members into those spaces because they don't feel safe. But it's my job to support them. It's not my job to gatekeep. And figuring that out is a tension. And then how we frame our questions, I think, is really important. The scribe that we can put back in the chat again is really beautifully done. And the answers are beautiful because, as I said in our breakout group, I'm sick to death of asking people what they don't have, what they need. Because, I mean, we know already, right? And they know, and they're tired of being asked. So for this session that we did, we started with memory. Like, what do you remember about food from your childhood? And we were struck by the connections that people immediately made from different places in the world and in the country. And then there were a few who were from the same state. So they realized that they were neighbors. But it shifted the tone in the room so dramatically. And then by the end of the meeting, which we didn't anticipate, they were telling me what the gaps and the challenges were, specifically that young people don't know how to cook. And they said, so we better teach them, find us a kitchen. And I left with my marching orders instead of how often we have to say, what are you going to commit to? What will you do next? They told me what to do, which is a precious moment that I won't forget for a very, very long time, I hope. So I just wanted to lift that up for you. No matter how long we've been doing it, we need to think about how we're doing it.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, everyone. So I know that there was a lot of great conversation, and I'm going to be following up with our team and as well as presenters to think about what a good second conversation might be on this, because I know there's still a lot of things folks are thinking about and want an opportunity to continue the conversation. So thank you again to our presenters for taking time to create the breakout sessions and provide your insights and expertise around this area and share that with other partners. We really appreciate that. And thank you to Edward for waking up early and joining us today and really providing us with some really great grounding and conceptualization around how we really make transformative narratives, which is hopefully one of our goals. And so I'm just going to share the screen with our upcoming sessions and remind you to do a survey. So if you can pop that survey into the chat, we love the feedback. We need the feedback. So giving you some time in this 3 minutes to complete the survey. And hopefully we hear back from you all about any feedback on today's session. Where are we? All right, so Our next session will be on October 2nd. And as I mentioned, going to follow up and think about planning what that might look like within our theme. We have some lunch and learn activities coming up. Our lunch and learn series is really for more targeted learning opportunities and to really gain like specific skills that you guys are hoping to gain a bit of knowledge on. And so these ones that are coming up in September, it will be on strategic planning. October 31st will be on like succession planning and like addressing like sort of turnover and making sure that you can sustain the movement when people come in and out of it. And then November will be focusing on building relationships with target communities and some specific strategies that can help you support the diversity of folks you're working with. And another thing to note within our capacity building is that we will be doing office hours in September and October. So if you haven't had a check-in with your program officer, if you have any questions, you can ask for this, or your program officer will reach out to you if they need to check in with you about anything. So the lunch and learns are optional to attend. And the program officers are discretionary. So if you need it, please do reach out to your program officer. And then the learning session in October will be a required activity. And that's what we have for now. So thank you so much for joining. Great seeing you all and enjoy your Wednesday. Goodbye.